Alan Shaw, disgraced CEO of disgraced railway company Norfolk Southern, the one who derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, and then burned all the chemicals off, thereby poisoning the entire community. Yeah, he went in front of some Congress people to discuss how he was going to make amends. Keep an eye out for Ted Cruz trying to look like a man of the people here.
Contributions to date are just the start. And what we're offering through the Family Assistance Center is that folks want to relocate, we will pay for the relocation fees. Our Family Assistance Center has been open since the day after the derailment.
So I want to understand you correctly. You're saying if a family in East Palestine wants to move, that Norfolk Southern will pay the cost of their moving. And will you also make them whole if they try to sell their house and they can get substantially less for it than they could have before this derailment?
Well, Ted, that would be the proper thing, I think, for the company to do. And your assumption about that is proper, but it's false. That is not what he is saying.
What I'm saying is that they want to leave their house for a while. We will pay for those relocation fees. And we are working with relevant stakeholders in a long-term fund for the property value assurance.
So you'll put them up in a motel or hotel temporarily, but you're not assisting with moving? I just want to understand what you're doing right now.
Right now, we are putting them up in a hotel and paying for food and clothing if needed.
If needed, food and clothing if needed. Don't forget, you're probably going to have to, send in your tax forms to see if you can afford the food and clothing, even though this guy poisoned you out of your house? I'm not sure, but that's what I'm assuming by the words, if needed.
And we're also working with relevant stakeholders on a long-term fund for property valuation.
Wow, what a champ. How fabulous. And the fact that right up front he said that the family center was open from day one. But if they really cared about families in East Palestine, one of the areas they've driven their trains through many a time, they would not have run what was known to the Union as a dangerous train through that town over and over, and not this time, and especially not one driven by like one guy. I mentioned as I was reading through this story, what I was noticing is that the Biden administration and our government are looking at, railroad safety. They're looking to put in restrictions that would make the rail lines safer, which I think is great. But what would be even greater on this, the anniversary of the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, or at least it's, I think, tomorrow, the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire in New York City, where the corporate overlords locked a bunch of very, very young Italian and Jewish girls into their jobs sewing in the textile factory on, I don't know what floor it was, 6th, 7th, 8th floor of a building in New York City that's now owned by NYU and has been cleaned up pretty good. All that's left of the death and destruction that happened there is a plaque. It is the anniversary of that, where those girls jumped to their death or burned to death so badly that the only thing that was left of them was their engagement rings. Yeah, on that anniversary, what we're talking about here is that unions would have saved this problem from happening in the first place with the railroad. And, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was one of the first, movements for organized labor here in the United States. So that's an exciting thing. But this is the deal. If the government really wanted to do something about these trains and their dangers, they would say, hey, stop union busting. Let the workers who are closest to what's going on the railways have rights. For example, the right to say, we're not going to drive this train because it's dangerous to our health, extremely dangerous to our health. How about that? They knew it was dangerous, but they had no rights. They had no right to say no. And guess what? They have a job and probably families, and they need that money, etc. I mean, it's just crazy. I'm sure you've heard talk about it before, that the fact that there was just one guy, they just the railway wants one engineer and maybe a conductor on the side. I was reading in the Washington Post that here it is. I want to make sure I get it for you. You're looking at the New York Times, but I've got the Washington Post pulled up here. This guy, he said, he was dodging questions, by the way. He said that he wasn't aware of any data backing up the idea that having both an engineer and a conductor on board a train boosted safety. And I suggest he checks out the the study done by the University of anybody's eyeballs, because it's so obvious that two people would be better than one. It's just jaw-droppingly disgusting. I mean, would you get on an airplane, sir, that only had a pilot and no co-pilot? What if that pilot got one of those peanuts stuck in his throat? You need somebody else to land the plane. So I would suggest, if it's a giant trainload of toxic chemicals, perhaps you need 4 or 5 people on there just to make sure. Unions. That would be awesome. Strength in unions would solve a lot of these problems. Let's look. I want to turn over in the same vein. We've got Cory Booker. And by the way, I support everything they're doing. I support everything that the administration is doing to make sure we have better train safety. But how about we let that train safety come from below, like grassroots, like the workers, like the unions, instead of just relying on some rule that the corporation's probably going to skirt anyway. Cory Booker, Cory Booker, in a related story, stick with me. I'm going to relate this. In a related story, Cory Booker introduced a sweeping environmental justice bill. He made an awesome speech, as Cory Booker is very good at doing. The bill is about righting environmental wrongs that disproportionately harm communities of color, low income, and indigenous communities. So things that have already gone bad, fixing those up. That's what the bill is about.
This bill is about a fundamental American ideal. This bill is about justice for all. You cannot have justice for all without environmental justice. We live in a nation that justice is having access to clean water. Justice is having access to clean air. Justice is having soil in your community that does not poison your children or threaten the lives of the elderly.
You know what would do that instead of just cleaning it up? How about regulating toxic chemicals that are known to cause safety issues, that are known to cause illness? We don't need the amount of toxic chemicals that we have out there right now. Don't get me started on PFAS, the forever chemicals. Anyway, go ahead, Cory.
This is about the fundamental idea of justice in America. And we know we don't have it because there are too many communities in which bad actors, corporate operators, are putting profits before people. They're putting their bottom line before the moral line. They are seeing a lot of activity, a lot of accounting, but there is no accountability.
I agree. Very good, Cory. This is terrific. But of course, we're again, we're trying to attack a problem instead of at the root, at the leaves. Well, to go with a tree analogy. Put your comments down below. I think that organized labor and democracy, which organized labor is actually kind of having a democratic voice against a corporate overlord, having the working class have some sort of rights that they can, and levers of power that they can push when the corporate masters, shall we call them, decide that they don't care about safety. They don't care about anything but the bottom line. They really don't care. They don't have a fiduciary responsibility to care. So what our government should do to counter that is support unionization. Here's another question I have about East Palestine, and I know I'm going back and forth, as I often do in these segments, and I hope you love me for it. How many people in East Palestine support the very people, the very government officials, the very party that would roll back their rights to regulation, both of railways, environmental regulation, and union rights, organization rights? How many people in is East Palestine a blue area? I'm Julianna Forlano. Put your comments below. You're watching the Julianna Forlano Show. I hope you have enjoyed these rant-a-ronies. This is the Political Voices Network.
Republicans say they won't cut Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid. But can honest, hard-working middle-class Americans really believe what these politicians say? Republicans said they wouldn't overturn Roe v. Wade. Here's what Supreme Court Justices Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Coney Barrett said during their Senate confirmation hearings.
Roe v. Wade, it is a precedent of the United States Supreme Court. A good judge will consider it as precedent of the United States Supreme Court.
Roe v. Wade. It's settled as a precedent of the Supreme Court.
Roe is not a super precedent, but that doesn't mean that Roe should be overruled.
Well, we saw how that turned out. They played us for fools. Tell your elected officials to keep their hands off of our Social Security and health care benefits. Fool me once. Let Majority Rule was responsible for this message. LetMajorityRule.org is a project of the Marvin Lucas Super PAC, which is responsible for and paid for this ad and is not affiliated with or authorized by any political campaign or candidate or candidates committee.